Joining me now on this issue, immigration lawyer Ivon Sampson and former Border Force Chief Immigration Officer Kevin Saunders. Welcome to you both. Ivon, I don't know how many times we've been over this territory. It's probably our 50th debate on exactly this very point. But these numbers, it should be said, for those who haven't caught the story, are legitimate. These aren't people who have jumped in the back of a lorry. These are people who've been greenlit and documented to come to the United Kingdom and some of their dependents as well. But is it simply too many, Ivon?
Well, if you actually break down the numbers into those who are coming here to work, those who are coming to study, and those coming for family visits, for example, people marrying foreigners from abroad, coming under as a spouse, or children coming, then it's interesting because what's gone up since last year has been the workers. And that's driven by economic need. Employers need workers. And if they can't find them in the UK economy, they have no choice but to go abroad. And the way the system is set up now, the employers have an opportunity to choose workers that they can't find in the UK without having to advertise them. And I'm afraid that the taxes of these people pays for our services.
So these people would have gone through... I mean, obviously, there are some students in there, and I said at the beginning, selling education overseas is a multi-million-pound business in this country, so we understand that. But those that have just come to work, they would have responded to a call to arms, as it were, from their own country, that, oh, look, Indeed. Britain needs more hairdressers or care workers or whatever it is.
Well, the 10% hike from last year was made up mostly of care workers in the health industry. That's what that was made of, because we don't have enough. Now, where's the problem? The problem is training, recruiting the right people who are settled here. Look, I'm 100% for British jobs for British workers. That's absolutely right. But what do employers do? That when they can't find them in our economy, they've got no choice but to take them abroad. The other interesting thing, Ian, is the retention figures. We have to remember that although these figures look alarming, 80%, for example, students go back home after their course is finished. They don't actually end up settling here. And while they're here, they're spending lots of money. Estimates have ranged from between 25 to 30 billion pounds a year. And remember, people who work here pay for their NHS care. They don't claim benefits, and they pay taxes. So the net cost to this country, it isn't really. They're actually benefiting our country.
OK. Kevin Saunders, you know your way around border regulations. Just to reiterate, this is legit migration, if you like. You know, nothing fishy in that respect, but it's still a big old number, right?
It's a huge number, but Ivon is quite right. We can't get Brits to do the job, so employers are having to go overseas, particularly in the NHS, to attract overseas workers. And these people go through a fairly extensive check before they get their visa to the UK. And so it's all done quite properly. I mean, with 5 million people in the UK that are not productive, it's not surprising that we're having to go overseas to get people. And just touching on the students do go, the majority of them go home at the end of their course, as Ivon said. It brings in a huge amount of money, and we've stopped students bringing in dependents now as well to reduce those numbers. So really, it's a problem, but it's not a problem, because if we need the people to do the work, we've got to go overseas to get them to do the work, to run our care homes and everything else.
Yeah, and I think, just to go back to your point, I think we all get that. I mean, we all understand that, you know, if it's about filling jobs, these people aren't people that just showed up saying, you know, you got any jobs out there? They replied, they filled out the documentation, and they got the rubber stamp. So we understand that bit. But that aside, Ivon, it's 1.2 million people have arrived in the last year into this country that weren't here before. Net, nearly 700,000. That's a huge number. It's a huge pressure on infrastructure. So whatever the legitimate arguments are about, as you rightly say, about jobs, etc., there is another issue here, isn't there? Where do people live? Where do they get medical care?
I think the figures will come down. If you read the report by the Migration Observatory, which is part of the University of Oxford, their forecast for the next 10 years is for those numbers to come down by 50%. We've had a spike post-pandemic, and I think that's why we're getting horrendous figures with regard to the student increase particularly. But you'll see the student numbers come down next year because they can't bring dependents, for example. You'll see the number of the overall trend over the next 5 years will be coming down to around about 300,000. And have you noticed the human rights application have come down by 10%, down to 9% now of the net figures, those who have been granted rights to remain for human rights. So most of this number is students and workers, which we need both. I'm afraid until we find British workers to the job, employers will continue to recruit from abroad.
And Kevin, Ivan there making the point reasonably that those numbers are predicted to come down. But in the last 20 years, since your time working in Border Force, these numbers are unrecognisable. The pattern is certainly that over the last couple of decades, it's very much gone up.
Yes, the numbers have gone up significantly. One of the things is that we encourage overseas companies to invest in the UK. So if you have an overseas company, say, from Norway, that wants to build wind turbines, for example, in the UK, they will set up in the UK, but they will have to bring their workers over to the UK to establish the factory and to establish and train the Brits. So the more foreign investment you have, the more people that you have to give a visa to, we call them monteurs in the business, to actually set the work up and do the initial work. So that again, adds to the figures.
And Ivan, just a final question. How did the UK survive? How did we get by 30 years ago without these kind of numbers of people coming in?
Free movement. That's how we survived. You have to remember that we had free movement. So we had all the workers from the whole of Europe to choose from.
These aren't European. These are outside the EU, it should be said, these figures we're looking at today.
No, we are. But remember, the numbers coming from the EU have gone down dramatically since Brexit. And now they can't come over here. So there's no pull factor at all from the EU citizens to come and live in the UK. Before we had the whole of Europe to recruit from, now we don't.
All right, Ivan, thank you for your time. Kevin, likewise, good to have you both on with us. Well.